I didn't know my life could collapse in such a quiet, methodical way. Not with screaming, not with cheating caught in bed, not even with betrayal the way movies show it. It began with someone telling me I was heartless. She said I didn't understand grief, that I was cold, unreasonable, cruel. So I opened a folder on my kitchen table and slid it toward her. 47 printed emails, 3 months of planning, a timeline, medical consultations, language so clinical it stripped love and marriage down to logistics. That was the moment I realized my husband and his ex-wife hadn't just crossed a boundary. They had built an entire plan behind my back and assumed I would eventually submit. My name is Claire. I'm 36 years old, and until recently, I thought I was in a stable marriage. I've been married to David, my husband, for 4 years. He's thoughtful, articulate, the kind of man people trust instinctively. He once told me honesty was the foundation of everything he believed in. That belief shattered when I discovered he and his ex-wife, Devin, had been coordinating something far bigger than grief counseling or shared memories of a lost child. They were planning a pregnancy, not ours, hers. Devin lost her 6-year-old daughter, Ruby, in a tragic accident last year, the kind of loss that rearranges your bones. I supported David through the aftermath. I supported her too. I believed grief deserved patience. What I didn't know, what no one bothered to tell me, was that while I was holding space for their pain, they were studying me, analyzing my reactions, predicting my objections, designing conversations to ease me into acceptance. They spoke about consent as if it were a speed bump. They spoke about my marriage as if it were an obstacle to manage. And when I said no, when I finally drew a line, they didn't hear boundaries. They heard betrayal. That's when they called me heartless. And that's when I realized something far more terrifying than grief was at play. Because grief doesn't usually draft strategy memos. Before everything shattered, my life was, if not perfect, at least steady. I was 36, working as an insurance claims adjuster, a job that trained me to look for inconsistencies, patterns, and intent. I spent my days listening to people explain why accidents weren't accidents, why timelines didn't quite add up, why they deserved exceptions. Ironically, I'd never imagined I'd need those same skills inside my own marriage. I met David 5 years ago at a charity networking event. He was calm where others were loud, thoughtful where others performed. We talked for nearly an hour about nothing particularly important. Travel plans we hadn't taken, books we'd started but never finished. When he asked for my number, it felt natural, unforced. Our relationship unfolded slowly, intentionally. David had baggage. He never hid that. He'd been divorced for 2 years when we met, and he had once been married to Devin. They shared a daughter, Ruby, who lived primarily with Devin, but spent weekends and holidays with David. I met Ruby when she was 4. She was bright, curious, the kind of child who asked questions adults didn't expect. She loved puzzles and insisted on brushing her own hair, even when it meant knots and tears. Over time, she grew comfortable with me. First politely, then affectionately. She'd sit beside me on the couch, lean her head against my arm, ask if I'd read the same story again. I never tried to replace her mother. I never crossed that line. I was simply present. Devin and I weren't friends, but we were respectful. Coordinated schedules, exchanged information, shared updates when Ruby stayed with us. David appreciated that I didn't compete, didn't resent the past he couldn't erase. We married after a year of dating. Small ceremony, close friends. Ruby was our flower girl, proudly scattering petals with exaggerated care. I remember David squeezing my hand and whispering, "This is everything." For a while, it really was. I built a relationship not just with my husband, but with his world, his routines, his memories, even his complicated history. Devin remained part of that orbit, distant but unavoidable. We were all adults. We were doing what people said mature families did. Then last May, Ruby drowned during a weekend trip. The call came late at night. David collapsed onto the floor when he heard the words. I remember kneeling beside him, my hands shaking, my brain refusing to accept the reality forming in front of me. Grief didn't just enter our lives, it occupied them. David stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped functioning. I took time off work, handled logistics, coordinated communication with Devin when David couldn't speak to her without breaking down. At the funeral, the 3 of us stood together, united by something unspeakable. I believed then that surviving this together would make us stronger. I didn't yet understand that grief doesn't always bind people. Sometimes it aligns them against someone else. In the months after Ruby's funeral, grief settled into our lives like heavy fog, thick, disorienting, impossible to rush through. David moved through the days mechanically. He attended work, came home, sat in silence. Some nights he talked about Ruby for hours. Other nights he couldn't say her name at all. I adjusted around him instinctively, handled meals, kept the house running, canceled social plans without complaint. Devon stayed in contact more than I expected. At first, it felt understandable. They had lost a child together. Divorce papers didn't erase that kind of bond. She texted David updates about grief counseling resources. He showed me the messages, always transparently. I never felt excluded. Around September, Devon suggested they meet for coffee. She says the therapist thinks it helps, David told me one evening, standing in our kitchen, staying connected to people who knew Ruby. It sounded reasonable, healthy even. I offered to come, but Devon insisted it would be better if it was just the two of them at first. Shared space for shared grief. David hesitated, then agreed. When he came home afterward, his eyes were red, but there was something else too, a strange brightness. She remembered the way Ruby used to spin in her dance shoes, he said softly. I'd forgotten that. The meetings became monthly. Eventually, Devon suggested I join. The three of us sat at Brennan's cafe, the same corner table every time. The conversations were heavy but controlled. Stories about Ruby's habits, her laugh, the way she used to argue bedtime rules. I mostly listened. Occasionally, I added small details. Ruby insisting on feeding the dog herself, the way she liked orange juice with too much ice. Devon would nod, grateful. More than once, she told me I was a blessing in David's life, that Ruby had loved me too. I believed her. That was my first mistake. Looking back, I see how carefully the atmosphere was shaped, how grief was allowed, but only in productive, forward-facing ways. How Devon guided conversations toward healing, legacy, continuity. At the time, it felt compassionate. David seemed lighter after those meetings, more engaged. He started talking about the future again, not our future exactly, but abstract ideas, meaning, purpose, carrying love forward. I noticed small things I dismissed. David began locking his laptop when he left the room. He took calls from Devon outside, claiming he didn't want to upset me with heavy topics. He used new language, medical, therapeutic terms that didn't sound like him. Processing loss, maintaining emotional continuity, honoring Ruby's memory. When I asked questions, he reassured me, told me I was being supportive, told me Devon was grateful for my understanding. I wanted to believe that. So I ignored the quiet discomfort in my chest, ignored the way conversations felt rehearsed, ignored the sense that something was forming without my participation. Grief explains a lot, but it doesn't explain everything. 3 weeks ago, we were sitting at Brennan's cafe, sunlight slanting across the table in that late afternoon way that usually made the place feel warm. That day it felt surgical. Devon stirred her coffee too slowly, eyes fixed on the swirling cream. David sat beside me, close enough that our knees touched, but his body felt distant, tense in a way I hadn't noticed before. Then Devon looked up. She had that expression people get when they're about to pitch something they've rehearsed too many times. Claire, she said, voice steady, almost professional, I need to ask you both something important. I braced myself, expecting questions about moving on, about selling the old house, about grief strategies. Instead, she inhaled and said, I want to have another child. The words didn't register at first. My brain stalled somewhere between confusion and disbelief. I want Ruby to have a sibling, Devon continued, a brother or sister, but I can't do that alone. I glanced at David, waiting for him to clarify, to interrupt. He didn't. I need David to be the father, Devon said, and I need you to be okay with it. The room tilted. I actually choked on my coffee, coughing hard enough that the barista glanced over. I'm sorry, what? Devon nodded, as if she'd expected the reaction. I've been thinking about this for months. Ruby was everything to me. Having another child, one who shares her DNA through David, it would help me heal. The way she said it, shares her DNA through David, made my stomach twist. David, I said slowly, tell me I'm misunderstanding this. He stared at his hands. Devon leaned forward. This wouldn't change anything between you and David. You wouldn't be raising the child. I'd have full custody. It would just be helping someone you love. I laughed once sharply. Helping someone by having my husband get his ex-wife pregnant? Not another woman, Devon corrected gently. Me, Ruby's mother. The distinction made it worse. This isn't something you just ask, I said. This is something married people discuss privately, if at all. I already talked to David, Devin said. He wanted your blessing. My head snapped toward him. When? Last week, David said quietly, at grief counseling. The betrayal hit before the words finished landing. You discussed this without me? I told her I'd need to talk to you first, he said, voice small. But, Claire, she's right. This could help her heal. It would honor Ruby. I stared at the man I married, trying to recognize him. I need time, I said finally. This isn't a decision you spring on someone in a cafe. Of course, Devin said smoothly. But time matters. David's 34. Fertility windows don't stay open forever. The pressure was unmistakable. We drove home in silence. That night, David tried to explain how Devin was drowning, how this would give her purpose, how it wouldn't affect our marriage. It wouldn't change anything, he kept saying. But all I could think was this. My husband had already imagined a future that didn't include my consent. That night, sleep refused to come. David lay beside me, breathing evenly, while my mind replayed every word from the cafe, the phrasing, the timing, the way Devin had spoken as if the decision were already halfway made. Shares her DNA through David. Your blessing. Time is a factor. I stared at the ceiling and felt something deeper than anger take root. Unease. In my job, unease is the warning sign. The moment when facts don't quite align, when explanations feel polished instead of honest. I'd trained myself to trust that instinct. But this wasn't a claim file. This was my marriage, and the person involved was my husband. The next morning, David brought it up again while I was making coffee. Have you thought about what Devin asked? He said carefully. I have, I replied, and I'm not comfortable with it. He frowned. Why not? The question stunned me. Because it feels wrong, I said. Because you discussed this without me. Because you're asking me to accept something that fundamentally alters our marriage. It wouldn't alter anything, he insisted. We wouldn't be raising the baby. Devin would. That doesn't matter. You'd still be the father. He sighed, frustration creeping in. You're making this about us when it's about helping someone in crisis. And what about my crisis? I asked quietly. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, She lost her child, Claire. How is asking for help manipulative? Because she presented it like you'd already agreed, I said. Because the conversation felt scripted. Because it wasn't a discussion. It was a pitch. His eyes hardened. So you think I'm being manipulated? I think you're grieving, I said gently. And I think she's taking advantage of that. The room went still. So I can't make decisions about my own body, he snapped. That's not what I said, I replied. But marriage means we make life-altering decisions together. Not one person deciding and asking the other to catch up. The argument ended badly. Voices raised just enough to hurt. Accusations flung and half retracted. He told me I was unsympathetic. I told him he was dismissing my boundaries. For the next 5 days, David grew distant. Polite. Cold. He spent hours on the phone with Devin, checking on how she was processing my reaction. Then Devin called me at work. Claire, she said, voice raw, woman to woman, I need you to reconsider. I'm drowning. I understand you're grieving, I said carefully, but this isn't the solution. Easy for you to say, she shot back. You haven't lost a child. No, I said, but I have a marriage to protect. So you're choosing your marriage over helping someone survive? She asked. The way she framed it, like morality itself depended on my compliance, felt like emotional blackmail. That night, David repeated her words almost verbatim. You're being heartless, he said. We could save her. At what cost? I asked. Our marriage? Your body? Our trust? Sometimes sacrifices matter, he replied. That's when I knew. This wasn't a conversation. It was a plan they'd already committed to. Once that realization settled in, that this wasn't a discussion, but a negotiation I'd been expected to lose, everything escalated quickly. The first sign was how coordinated they suddenly became. David started using Devin's phrases word for word. Legacy, healing, continuity. The same clinical framing, the same emotional pressure disguised as compassion. Every objection I raised was met with a pre-prepared response, as if they'd already rehearsed my resistance. Devin wouldn't even need you involved after conception, David said one evening, standing at the kitchen counter. It would be like being a gestational donor. A donor? I repeated. You're talking about yourself like you're a medical resource, not my husband. He flinched but kept going. You're letting your ego get in the way. That word, ego, was the first time I felt something crack inside me. This wasn't anger anymore. It was displacement. If he could reduce my fear to ego, he didn't have to confront what he was asking me to sacrifice. Then his family got involved. David's sister called first. Her voice was soft, disappointed. She told me David was fragile, that Devin was broken, that compassion sometimes meant doing uncomfortable things. His mother left a voicemail the next day. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She told me I lacked empathy and warned me not to stand in the way of healing. I noticed something chilling. No one asked what I needed. No one asked how this affected my marriage. The narrative had already been written. Meanwhile, the evidence kept piling up. David was suddenly gone for hours at a time. Walks, dogs, he said, clearing my head. His phone was always face down now. Password changed. Notifications silenced. The investigative part of my brain, the one I'd been suppressing, started screaming. 2 days later, I came home to find David sitting at the dining table with a folder. My stomach dropped before he even spoke. Devin wanted to show us how straightforward this would be, he said carefully. Brochures from a fertility clinic spilled out. Legal templates. A printed IVF timeline with dates circled in pen. This is already researched, I said slowly. She wanted to make sure it was viable, he replied, before bringing it to you. Before bringing it to me. When would this happen? I asked. Next cycle, he said. The doctor is already familiar with the situation. That sentence echoed in my head. Already familiar. I felt dizzy, not with shock this time, but clarity. This wasn't hypothetical. This wasn't grief-fueled brainstorming. This was operational. That night, something else happened. David left his laptop open on the kitchen table when he went out for a run. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen. I hated the idea of invading his privacy, but I hated more the feeling that my entire reality was being managed without my knowledge. I told myself I was allowed to understand what was happening in my own marriage. I clicked. What I found didn't just confirm my fears. It rewrote everything. It was just past 6 a.m. when I finished reading the last email. The house was silent. The coffee had gone cold beside me. My hands were trembling, not violently, but with the kind of controlled shake that comes when your body understands something your heart is still trying to reject. 3 months. 3 full months of emails between David and Devin. Subject lines disguised as mundane check-ins. Threads buried beneath innocuous titles. But once I started reading, it became impossible to stop, like watching a slow-motion collapse you can't intervene in. They hadn't just talked about the idea. They had planned it. Devin wrote about maintaining operational security until Claire is on board. David replied about managing Claire's concerns and timing the reveal for maximum acceptance. They debated strategy. They predicted my reactions. They discussed whether it would be easier to involve me at all, or simply inform me once a pregnancy was already in progress. One message made my chest physically ache. Claire responds well to logical framing, David had written. Emphasize helping you heal rather than us creating a child together. Use medical terminology. She's less emotional when things sound clinical. I read that sentence over and over. My husband had reduced me to a psychological profile, a set of levers to pull, buttons to press, weaknesses to exploit. Devin replied a few minutes later. What if she refuses completely? David's answer came fast. She won't. She's loyal to a fault and hates conflict. If we present a united front and give her time, she'll come around. She always does. I felt something inside me break. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly. Like a bone cracking under steady pressure. They'd planned the cafe conversation down to Devin's exact wording. They'd rehearsed David's expressions of hesitation, just enough to seem fair. They'd scheduled fertility consultations I knew nothing about. Then I reached the email from last Tuesday. Procedure scheduled for Monday if Claire agrees this weekend. Dr. Hoffman confirmed optimal timing. Monday. They had booked the IVF appointment before asking for my consent. I sat there in the half-light of morning, staring at the screen, realizing my marriage hadn't been unraveling in real time. It had already unraveled. I was just the last one to be informed. I printed everything, 47 pages, each one heavier than the last. By the time David came back from his run, I was sitting at the table with the stack neatly arranged, my expression calm in a way that surprised even me. He froze when he saw the papers. Want to tell me, I said quietly, about your 3 months of secret planning? The color drained from his face, and for the first time since this began, he had no prepared response. That was my lowest point, not the anger, not the betrayal. But the realization that the person I trusted most had been studying me like a target. David stood there, staring at the stack of papers as if they might disappear if he didn't touch them. He picked up the first page, then the second. By the third, his hands were shaking. Claire, I can explain, he said, voice cracking. Explain what? I asked calmly. My heart was pounding, but my mind felt unnervingly clear. Explain how you've been lying to me for 3 months? Or how you scheduled a medical procedure without my consent? We weren't manipulating you, he insisted. We were trying to make this easier for you. I gestured to the highlighted email. By analyzing my personality to find my weak spots? He opened his mouth, closed it. Were you planning to tell me about Monday's appointment? I continued, or just present me with a pregnancy and hope I adjusted? His silence was answer enough. We were going to talk this weekend, he said finally, after you'd had time to process. You mean after you'd already decided, I replied. That's when the tears started. Not dramatic sobs, quiet, desperate ones. He talked about pressure, about Devon's despair, about how he didn't want to lose anyone else he loved. All I could think about was that sentence. She's loyal to a fault. They'd counted on my loyalty to override my boundaries. The appointment is Monday, I said. Yes, he whispered. You're going to cancel it, I said evenly, or I'm filing for legal separation on Tuesday. He looked at me like I'd struck him. You'd end our marriage over this? I didn't raise my voice. You already ended our marriage, I said. I'm just making it official. That night, he called Devon. I could hear her through the phone, her voice sharp with panic. He's being selfish, she said loudly. This is about Ruby's legacy. That was the moment I understood something vital. This was never about grief. Grief doesn't draft strategies. Grief doesn't map out psychological pressure points. Grief doesn't schedule procedures behind someone's back. This was about control. I packed a bag and left that night, driving to my brother's apartment with my mind buzzing, but my resolve solid. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. I brought the evidence folder. He read silently for 10 minutes. I've never seen documentation this clear, he said finally. This reads like a conspiracy. We filed that afternoon. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. Once the paperwork was filed, the fallout spread faster than I expected. David was served on Thursday. His reaction was immediate and dramatic. Text after text insisting I was escalating things unnecessarily, that lawyers were a nuclear option, that we could still talk this out like adults. He framed the separation as my overreaction to a misunderstanding, carefully avoiding the words deception or planning. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a 3-month strategy that failed. When the news reached our social circle, the lines were drawn almost instantly. David's sister called me vindictive. She said I was punishing him for having compassion. His mother left another voicemail, this one colder, telling me I never understood what family loyalty meant, that I was choosing pride over healing. Devon, meanwhile, went on a quiet but deliberate campaign. She reached out to mutual friends, presenting herself as the grieving mother I was refusing to help. She told them I'd denied her the one thing giving her hope, that I'd weaponized boundaries against someone in crisis. One of our friends, Marcus, called me confused. Claire, I know you're hurt, he said carefully, but Devon lost her daughter. Wouldn't this help her move forward? Would you be okay with your spouse having a child with their ex? I asked. There was a pause. Maybe. It's complicated. It's not, I said. It's manipulative. Not everyone bought their narrative. A coworker read the emails and said, they studied you like a psychology experiment. A neighbor who'd watched everything unfold shook his head. Grief explains behavior. It doesn't excuse months of lying. The split was revealing. People who knew me, really knew me, understood why I'd walked away. People who felt sorry for Devon believed grief justified anything. The lowest point came Tuesday when Devon showed up at my office. Security escorted her in before I could stop it. Claire, she pleaded, woman to woman, you loved Ruby. Don't you understand wanting her legacy to continue? I understand wanting that, I said. I don't understand lying to get it. She cried, said the baby would save her, said I didn't understand maternal grief. What broke me was when she shouted, as security led her out, that I was killing Ruby all over again. Using a dead child's memory as emotional blackmail crossed something irreversible. David texted that night. Devon is devastated. How can you be so cruel? I replied once. Ask her how cruel it was to manipulate both of us for 3 months. After that, I stopped engaging. The truth didn't need defending anymore. It was already doing the work on its own.